And I just said what everyone told me to say. It was like a script. And I said, Carmela, mommy, daddy, I have to tell you something. I said, your body is healthy. Mommy's body is healthy. I'm right here. And daddy's body is healthy. And he's here. And your little sister was born and her body didn't work and she died. And, I'm like holding my breath. Like, I'm like, I don't even know how I got that out. And Carmela sort of looks at me and Paul and goes, like, processes it. And she says, don't worry, mom and dad. You'll have another baby one day and their body will work. So Paul and I started crying hysterically at that point. There was no more keeping it together. And to think that that was her reaction was so unforgettable. And Paul and I felt comforted by our almost 3-year-old. Like that's an unbelievable, unforgettable family moment. And I will say that that's so representative of how the next year and a half went. Like, Carmela has been a part of this recovery for all of us so much.
Christina Perri, welcome to the Motherly Podcast.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with this question. What surprised you the most about motherhood?
Oh, that's a good question. I want to say everything. Honestly, so my daughter Carmela is 3.5, actually almost 4. She'll be 4 in January. And I am definitely the type of person that does research, reads things, read No Bad Kids, was obsessed with Janet Lansbury, still is actually. But, all these, I tried to gather as much information as possible to prepare for motherhood. Some women totally wing it. I was like, just my personality type is to try to be prepared, and still was no way in any way, shape, or form prepared for the transition from not being a mom to being a mom. I was like, naturally, I felt that I was supposed to be a mom. I always really wanted to be a mom. So I was really glad when Carmela showed up, because some of my intuition was right, that you just kind of know what to do for your child. So I leaned heavily into that, even though I had done all this research, but you don't know what kind of kid you're going to get. And Carmela was so good, and also didn't sleep, and also ate every hour and a half. And, there were just these things that you can't prepare for unless, you're in the middle of doing it. So I think a lot of things shocked me about motherhood, in the sense that things were more challenging than I thought they would be. But also, I was pretty shocked at how, like I said, how naturally I kind of knew what Carmela needed. And my husband would be on the phone with a pediatrician, or his mom, actually, he would text his mom constantly, or call her. And I'd be like, no, I think we should do this. I can kind of feel it. And, and I think I was shocked at how getting quiet and listening to that intuition was my best tool.
When you think about your life before you had kids,
yeah,
who was that person, and how is she different from who you are now?
Oh my God. Well, I think about this often, as I think most moms do, because the thing for me too is I was so many people before I had Carmela. I wasn't even just one person. I had what feels like so many different lives within this life, but I had a career that was booming and wonderful and amazing. And I was on tour for 6 years. And then I made the conscious decision to stop and make a family, because I wanted to do that so bad. These are my Italian roots. That Italian voice is it is time. And so I knew I wanted to have a spouse and get married and have babies and live in New Jersey in a house with a pool. This is what I kind of dreamt up. And it was the opposite of the life I was living on tour. So I find it really interesting now that now I'm trying to figure out how to do both and marry both worlds, because I am putting more music out. And to be honest, I wasn't sure I'd really go back to doing that. I thought, I didn't know. I didn't make a plan. I just knew I wanted a family. And, I was pregnant 3 times. So I did plan on having a bunch of kids, and I did try. And now that I'm coming back and putting out music, it doesn't feel like a failure in any way. I was making music the whole time. It just looks so different as a mom, because before I did this podcast with you, I'm like rushing my daughter into the car because like I got to curl my hair. And I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
like the stress of just trying to do both things is just so different. It's
Mm-hmm.
wonderful, but it's like the brain, like the kind of like, I don't know, switching of the hats constantly as a mom. Like we're already doing that like crazy when we're being just, an awesome parent. But then to add in other
Mm-hmm.
things at all in any capacity is just like, wow, like we are
Mm-hmm.
so amazing. Like I get blown
Mm-hmm.
away by our awesomeness like all the time. And, even Carmela will be like, Mom, you were just the best mom of all the moms. And I'm just like, thank you. Like she'll like notice. She's such an empath. She'll like notice if like, I kind of nailed something really good in like mom land
Mm-hmm.
or like, and I always say when I make mistakes, I mean, it's a whole new world of parenting now. It's awesome and so emotional and all that. But anyway, my previous self, I I think the thing that sticks out the most is like she just worried about so many things I don't worry about anymore. Do you know what I mean? And I wonder if that's
Mm-hmm.
also like 20 something me
Mm-hmm.
versus 30 something me. I think like, whether or not you become a parent, I think you enter into that stratosphere at some point where you're just like, oh, wow, why did I care so much about, my facial hair or, my, skin or my, those photos or, what that guy said or, what I'm doing tonight. Like all that stuff seems to matter so much more when you're younger. And then feel like through aging, I just sort of chilled out a bit, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Also, paralleling maybe at the same time, like going into your 30s, you just sort of accept who you are more. I don't want to say like it goes one way or the other. Maybe people like or don't like themselves in a way, or maybe they decide to change a lifestyle or something. But I feel like that's around the season where you're like, oh, this works for me or this doesn't work for me. And that awareness, I feel like, takes aging or parenthood. I think parenthood really just kind of kicks you into it.
I know you haven't been hiding your
Sure.
miscarriage, your pregnancy loss, and stillbirth experiences, but
Yeah.
can you talk to our listeners a little bit more about what pregnancy has been like for you in general and what happened over the
Sure.
last year and a half?
Sure. Well, I had Carmela 3.5 years ago, and that was a really normal, wonderful pregnancy. And then I got pregnant again in November of 2019 and miscarried at 11 weeks
Mm.
on January 10th of 2020. Now, what's really interesting too is like the entire world just went through a really traumatic experience with the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic. And so 2020 was terrible for everyone, And I look back at it now and it's hard to like sometimes I would forget there was a pandemic because we were going through such a personal hard time, me, my husband, and our family, that I would forget the whole world was going through something too. Like it was just exponentially awful, 2020. But I didn't really know it at the time in January. What I knew of miscarriage was this happens to 1 in 4 women. Um, I've shared about it as soon as it happened. I wanted to be a voice that's like, hey, this happened. Like I'm always that honest. I'm that honest just in my life all the time. So I wasn't gonna act as if that didn't happen. And I shared my experience in January of 2020. And then I started having like health complications and a couple of things like with thyroid problem and a cyst on my ovary. All of a sudden, these like
Mm.
health issues started happening. But I got pregnant again. Mother's Day 2020 is when I found out. So I was like, well, obviously my body must be okay because it's not easy to get pregnant. So many people, struggle with getting pregnant. So I've learned in my adult life that it's not easy. And so I thought, well, I must be okay because my body did this. So I got pregnant in May, or I guess April. And that pregnancy was completely fine. I mean, I was sick. I've always gotten sick in my pregnancies now that I know I've had three. Um, I'm sick for like the whole first trimester, a little bit into the second one. Nothing seemed different. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so, just to not kind of jump over the first miscarriage too much. It was so traumatizing to go through that, especially because there was no, I mean, 11 weeks is pretty, that's, I almost announced it. I had done a photo shoot. We had
Mm.
done a photo announcement. Like we were a week away from announcing that I was pregnant. So it really did shock us and it shook our whole family, and it was heartbreaking. It was definitely heartbreaking. There was nothing easy about it. I'd never experienced it before, so I went through the stages of grief with that. And then I remember I went to Nashville about a month later. I healed for about three weeks at home and with my family. They came
Mm-hmm.
and they took care of me and Paul. And Carmel was too little to actually recognize what was going on. She had just turned 2. So and also I didn't show. I wasn't showing yet. So I think about it now, like Carmel was so affected when Rosie died because, well, I was 8 months pregnant. We had a nursery and we talked about her every day. And so, but when I had this miscarriage, she didn't
Wasn't.
quite understand yet.
Mm-hmm.
And which was a blessing at the time. And so Paul and I were able to just enjoy her. Like she brought us a lot of joy at that time to get through it together. And we were sad, but what I learned about miscarriage in that time was that it's just so common that like, it's sad and it happens, and it's I don't want to say normal, but it's common enough that like I found comfort in all the
Mm-hmm.
women who came before me who miscarried. Also, everyone who ever had a miscarriage reached out to me and said, me too, which is like, it's really the awesome thing about social media. I will say, like, people have a love-hate relationship with it. When I've gone through anything, especially hard, but even, happy, wonderful things that people, celebrate with you is really nice. But when I go through things that are really difficult or hard and share vulnerably about something in my life, and thousands of people or hundreds of people reach out and say, me too, and here's
Mm-hmm.
my story, like that has saved me so many times. Even when I had postpartum depression with Carmela, I remember I opened up all my DMs. This was back in like 2019, and I was like, "Hey, I'm feeling this way. Is anybody else feeling this way, or anything anybody wants to say? I'm listening." And oh my gosh, I was blown away by the outreach, and so that's like a huge,
Mm-hmm.
wonderful gift about social media.
Absolutely. And I think it's especially for mothers who, so often we have been isolated in our homes caring for our
Yeah,
children, and we don't feel seen and
exactly.
connected. And although it's not the same as having, a village around us, I think
Sure.
there is positive elements and ways that we can feel supported with or connected to other people going through the same thing that I think really is changing the culture around motherhood, but also frankly you
100%.
you talking openly, it's I'm sure it's really hard to speak openly about it. So you spoke just now about the support you got through postpartum depression and
Yeah,
miscarriage. Can you talk to the extent that you want to share what it was like with Rosie's pregnancy and stillbirth, because maybe a
sure.
lot of people don't know what that's like, and it's so awful and scary that maybe we
Yeah,
don't want to talk about it, but then it makes people like you feel even more alone,
right, right.
and maybe it's an opportunity also to honor those lives that of those babies. So,
Yeah,
what are you able to share? What do you want to share about that experience?
sure. Well, so I guess where I'll start is I wasn't afraid about getting pregnant again. After I miscarried at 11 weeks in January, I remember thinking, I still want to give Carmela a sibling. It's a huge hurdle to get pregnant again after loss. I see that, I recognize that. And I understand why some women don't, because it's just really heartbreaking, and it changes you in a lot of ways when you have, I think, pregnancy loss. But having said that, I still so desperately wanted Carmela to have a sibling, and wanted a big family my whole life. And so I just remember kind of letting go and being like, if it's supposed to be, it'll be. And I did get pregnant, and so I didn't want to spend the whole pregnancy being anxious. I understand with pregnancy already comes a million hormones and all the things. And I did have postpartum depression and a little bit of prenatal anxiety when I was pregnant with Carmela. These are things I learned having gone through it. So I was really trying to emotionally protect myself, and I kind of had good language around it. I'm also been sober for almost 10 years, and so I have a program of recovery that I lean on. I have an incredible family that I lean on. My husband Paul is so supportive and wonderful, and I've got little Carmela, so I'm running around taking care of my 2-year-old, and I'm pregnant with Rosie. We never found out that her sex, so we didn't know she was a girl until she was born. But I was pregnant with her, and I just sort of let it go. I mean, I was like, I'm going to show up, and I had some special doctor's appointments because at this point I was 33, and because I had a miscarriage and because I had a thyroid problem, I was taking thyroid medication. It's kind of like a high risk
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy. So what they do is what I did is I saw my regular OBGYN, and then I would see this high risk doctor like once a month. And basically, what it meant is I just got a couple more sonograms, a couple more images of the baby, just to make sure everything was fine. And the truth is, everything was fine for 30 weeks. So I had what felt like a normal pregnancy. I was, sick the whole time, and I was chasing Carmela around, and I was growing at a normal size, and nothing was abnormal or wrong. And on November 10th of 2020, I remember I went for my monthly checkup to the high risk doctor. And I mean, every test, every exam, everything had been normal up until that point. And then at 30 weeks, they found that there was a blockage in her intestines. And so that meant a couple things. One is, I feel like that day was almost more traumatizing in a way because when Rosie did die and we went through that whole thing, we had already knew for 10 days that she wasn't well. But the shock of my pregnancy being fine and then at 30 weeks not being fine and I was rushed to the hospital, that was really traumatizing for me and Paul. And Carmela too, because we didn't come home from the doctor. We went to the hospital, and I remember talking to some toddler specialists about her reaction to us not coming home that day. Really did affect her. So, but we didn't know. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
we were just. It happened very fast, and so we went. I went into the hospital, and I shared about this. I tweeted about it. I Instagrammed my story. I was like, I'm here in the hospital. I might have to stay here until baby comes. Now, this was November. I was due in January. So this would have been very early. And so I shared my experience, and so many women wrote to me about their children with intestinal problems. The NICU experience they had, some women talked about things that Rosie didn't have, but it was still helpful to
Mm-hmm.
hear what their experience was like because all of a sudden, Paul and I were now going to be parents preparing for the NICU and preparing for a premature baby, and then also with needing surgery right when she was born. So anyway, this is just the story of what happened,
Mm-hmm.
and so we were shocked, and then also comforted, like, hey, these this has happened, many times. We talked to the surgeon. She had done thousands of these operations, like people were just making us feel a lot better. And everything looked, we had found out about her, it was called atresia of the gut. But everything else looked fine. So we were like, okay, so, we may have this baby early and he or she may need surgery and we'll get through it, and I was thinking about an Airbnb to get in New York City near the hospital and around Christmas. And we were talking about how we're going to, have the holidays with our families. Like we were really planning, to have this baby and to do what was needed for them. And I did probably the most research ever on atresia. And like, I was so prepared for what I thought was going to be, their birth and then this treatment plan. So what happened was on November 23rd, only 13 days later, they had sent me home and they said, we're going to check you every 2 days. So I went to the hospital every 2 days for what's called prenatal screening. And, uh, and it was, they check the heart rate, they check my blood pressure, they're checking baby, they do a scan. It's like what they do just to clear you for the day, like to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that you're okay, all the vitals and everything. So it was fetal monitoring. That's what it was called. And so I went in it was a Monday. I went in that morning at 11 a.m. and everything was fine. And then 11 p.m. I knew something was wrong. I hadn't felt baby move. And that's honestly, I just want to take a second because it's really just like every mother who gets pregnant, it's like our worst nightmare, you know? And I I'm sharing this specifically because we all think we couldn't possibly get through something like this. And even though like what I'm going to continue to share is very hard to hear and it's so many people said to me, I can't imagine what you went through. I can't imagine being you. I can't imagine doing that. And I don't wish it upon anybody ever, ever, ever. But I do know that like here I am, I got through it. And so I just want to say that, and I just want to hold space for women who had that moment too. That moment's really hard because I mean, how many times, because I've had a successful pregnancy, I know when I would think Carmel wasn't moving and then I would kind of wiggle her and she'd move and you're like, oh, because you are really dealing with that pressure. I mean, that really is they're in our little, we are their little house, right? So the whole time we're hoping that they're okay. The whole time without even thinking about it, we're hoping that. So when I knew something was wrong, it really was awful. Paul and I drove to New York City from Jersey, silent, just silent in the car. Like I remember the car ride and my OBGYN met me there, which is interesting because I didn't think she was gonna, but she heard in my voice that I was concerned. And she had delivered Carmela. We were pretty close. And so anyway, the truth is I went there and there was no heartbeat and she had passed away. Now, the hardest part about the next 3 days, I'm happy to share about anything, but what I think is most important is that two things. One is I am really grateful I got to meet her. So when I found out that she had died, I was 8.5 months pregnant, so I knew I was going to have to give birth. We have options, and I was given the option to have a natural birth or have a C-section. I mean, really, my doctor wanted me to be comfortable. I will say that I was at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City, and those nurses, I mean, I can't even talk about it without choking up about how they carried me through this experience, me and Paul, and how sensitive and sweet and loving and kind and gentle they were with me. And it's probably the worst case scenario for everybody in the room too. It wasn't just my worst experience of my life. It was also Paul's. It was also the doctors. It was also the nurses. Like it was terrible. It was just like a very hard experience. And for that, that's why we all just bonded. I mean, we were just hugging and full of tears and loving each other through the whole couple days we were there, and I have to really say, how loved and supported I really was.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided at first, I'll be honest, at first I was like, nope, no, thank you. I don't want to be here. Just knock me out. Knock me out. This experience is too much for my heart. It's too much for my head. I don't want to be here. This is no. And then my doctor said something really powerful to me. And she said, Christina, we'll do whatever you want. She said, but if you have a C-section, you'll stay here for a couple of days. If you don't, you'll go home to Carmela sooner. And so I was like, okay, anything for Carm, because I knew she was going to be worried. A, where are we? B, I couldn't even fathom that conversation that we were going to have with her when we got home. So I wanted to just get it over with in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And what I will say also that I remember is, I want to say it took 12 hours. I mean, I was induced. And, in that time that I was in the hospital with Paul, we had such a shift in perspective. I want to say it was a really beautiful thing that we didn't hurry up and do that, because the feelings and emotions I had when she passed away to when we met her, was so different. I was ready to meet her. I wanted to take a picture. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to, it was just so different. Paul and I were able to process our grief that whole day. And I'm sure we were in enormous amounts of shock, but we were
Mhm.
able to make better choices 12 hours later than I think we would have made, had I, and look, no judgment, everyone does what they need to do. I'm just saying my experience was I'm so grateful that I gave birth to her, that I met her, that me and Paul held her, and that we have that memory and that we have that with her. And it was it was heartbreaking is the only real way to explain it. It was physically awful to go through something like that. Um, but when because I'm already a mom and I'm already a mom to my now almost 3-year-old, I went into mom mode of okay, how do we tell Carmela? So this was almost like a little bit of a silver lining that we I'm so grateful we already had a child, first of all, because I feel for all the women that have multiple losses and don't yet know the joy of having a child. So we already knew we had Carmela, but we also knew that we needed to kind of band together for her, and that was a huge piece of the recovery for us. Was it's like you just have to show up for your kids. It's like if you're sick and you can't be when you're a mom, you just have to, like, you do intuitively what they need. And so Paul and I spent the whole day in the hospital. We spoke to, I want to say, three social workers, two toddler specialists online. Big Little Feelings is an account actually on Instagram, and I wrote to those women
Mm.
and said, "Help me, please. What do I say? What do I say to my toddler?" People were so amazing. Janet Lansbury wrote to me what to say. Because I asked, I very much asked for help. I was like, I can't do this alone. I can't figure this out alone. And I don't know how consciously I was thinking, but I'm grateful that my intuition was to ask for help.
Mhm.
So I was asking people's advice because I think you really want to lie. I think you really want to not tell your almost 3-year-old the truth, but every single person, from the doctors to the social workers to the specialists to everyone, said tell her the truth. And so Paul and I practiced the whole way home. I mean, this was really the thing we focused on. I have to be honest. And we told our parents to put Carmela in her bedroom, and that we were going to go straight to her first, and then we would see everyone, because we didn't want to see everyone and start crying. We were trying to be so strong for her, and so we went in her room, and I'll share the conversation we had because it's so profound. Um, we Paul and I were able to be calm, but Carmela knew that we were at the hospital and that we would be coming home with the baby, so she was prepared to meet her sibling. We walked in the room, and children are so intuitive, and so they have so much empathy, and they can just feel. We don't even have to say anything, and they just know things. And so Carmela was really gentle, and she gave us a big hug and kiss, and we said, "Oh, we missed you," and I was walking normal, like I looked okay, and I just said what everyone told me to say. It was like a script, and I said, "Carmela, mommy, daddy have to tell you something." I said, "Your body is healthy. Mommy's body is healthy. I'm right here, and daddy's body is healthy, and he's here. And your little sister was born, and her body didn't work, and she died." And I'm like holding my breath. Like, I'm like, I don't even know how I got that out. And Carmela sort of looks at me and Paul and goes, like, processes it. And she says, "I'm sorry, by the way, I'm sorry for making you cry." And she says, "Don't worry, mom and dad. You'll have another baby one day, and their body will work." So Paul and I started crying hysterically at that point. There was no more keeping it together. And to think that that was her reaction was so unforgettable. And Paul and I felt comforted by our almost 3-year-old. Like, that's an unbelievable, unforgettable family moment. And I will say that that's so. representative of how the next year and a half went. Like Carmela has been a part of this recovery for all of us so much. And I did say to her, mommy, daddy are very sad and we're going to cry. And your grandma and grandpa are going to cry and mama and papa are going to cry. Like we also prepared her for that, for the sadness. And she cried and we held each other. And then that was the beginning of our grief.
Mm.
But we shared everything with her, everything. I mean, but here's the thing. I also only shared with what she'd ask because I didn't, they also say if you're telling your young child the truth, like you stick to the minimum, like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to go into, you know, heaven and God and, like all these things. It was
Mm-hmm.
one thing at a time. Carmela would ask questions, we would answer them. And as a family that day, we started to heal. It was Thanksgiving of 2020. And so, oh gosh, it's been almost a year. I mean, I'm like, there's so much to say. I just feel like it was a moment, worth telling, that story that, that's how powerful and loving children are. I also
Mm-hmm.
think that's how important it is to tell them the truth. Carmela was able to handle it and integrate it. And she had her reactions and we had our reactions and we were really careful to make room for all of the big ones and all the big feelings and things and but it really started to set us on this journey of healing through truth, and acceptance. And I just want to say, like, it's the hardest thing in the whole world to accept. I might sound like, oh yeah, we were fine. Like, no, we were not fine. Like, we were not
Mm-hmm.
fine. I'm a year later now, and I've talked about it every day for a year. So this is the only reason why I'm okay right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've integrated it into my life. I've done so much therapy. I've
Mm-hmm.
done EMDR therapy, regular therapy. Carmela did two types of therapy. Paul and I do couples therapy. Paul does therapy. I go to meetings. I have a community of women who have had loss. I have upped my support
Mm-hmm.
system times a million. I have
Mm-hmm.
needed so much help. So I don't want to sound in any way like I got this. I definitely did
Mm-hmm.
not have this. And I struggled through all of it and until I would figure something out. And, you know, everyone was having bad days on different days and we all carried each other. And but that's what happened. And
Mm-hmm.
Carmela still talks about Rosie almost every day. She knows I made this lullaby record for her sister. We have a little rose tree that's Rosie's. We have wind chimes that's Rosie's. My husband and I have tattoos here on our hearts for Rosie. Carmela wants a tattoo when she's older. And she is such a huge part of our life and our family and our story. And her Carmela sometimes will be like, my sister's body didn't work and she died, and at like a playground with a child who's like, what? Like, and so Carmela has been forced to grow up a little bit, more than we expected at this age, but she is so sweet and just talks about Rosie like she's her little sister. And we
Mm-hmm.
still hope we can give Carmela a sibling. I mean, the fact that Carmela said that the second we told her, gives us hope that, maybe one day, we'll try again and it will be meant to be. But for now, Carmela still is a big sister.
Mm-hmm. First of all, thank you for
Yeah,
sharing all of that and what you went through, or some of what you went through, with our
sure.
listeners. Um, I guess I want to talk a bit more about your own healing. You mentioned the
Sure.
therapy, the support groups, but
Hmm.
maybe let's talk about, for those of us who have friends who have experienced this kind of loss,
Hmm.
um, how can we be there for others? What was most helpful? What was maybe not helpful? If you're able to share
Sure.
some of those things as well. What does healing really look like, and how can we all be a part of that for one another?
Okay. That's such a great question. I will say, I feel like in general, and I do think that so many great organizations
Yeah.
and things are really moving this conversation and really changing, like you said, culture about death in general. But I think we
Mm-hmm.
have very strange language around death. It
Yep.
is instilled in us from our childhood and older generations, I think, but we need to start really breaking those molds and redoing this because the best thing to do is to look someone in the eye and have a conversation and just say, I'm so sorry and what can I do? Not certain quotes like, they're in a better place. You can try again one day, at least you got pregnant. I mean, these are things like, and I don't want to go too much into the negative because what I will say is no one intends on hurting you. No,
Yep.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I've heard it all in this whole year. I've heard like from the best to the worst things to say, and I have had a lot of patience and compassion because early on I realized everyone says what they need to say for them to feel better.
So
So,
true.
for instance, my mom is so Catholic, she believes that Rosie is with the Lord. And I'm like, you know what? Great. My mom prays to Rosie every day. It's part of that is her story, and that is what she needs. And that's great for my mom. And I'm happy she has that. I have a whole different idea of that. I would rather believe that Rosie's in my heart, or rather believe that Rosie's doing another life and that I might see her again one day. And so it is a little bit hard to put on someone, your belief system. And I think that that's probably why we don't have, like, some cultures have like something they do for this, that is
Yeah.
like regular for everyone. And I will say that it is sort of beautiful about America that we all have our own belief systems, but at the same time, we're kind of lacking in the language department around grief, because I will say the best thing is talking about her. And what's interesting is people don't want to talk about her, and I
Well,
am now
I
also
actually I
represented.
wanted to ask you about her. I'm
Yeah.
sorry to cut you off. I actually
Hmm.
wanted to ask you about her. Um, I have two good friends who both experienced full term stillbirths. I
Wow.
went to one of these babies' funerals actually
Hmm. Wow.
2 years ago, and I try to be there for them, but I'm sure I'm not doing a good enough job. I'm sure of it. Um, so I guess what I want to ask you is, can you tell us about Rosie? And can you share more about how you remember her and how you practice mothering her and Carmela as well?
Sure. I had a brief moment with her. I want to say it was probably maybe a half hour that Paul and I held her. She had already passed away, so her eyes were closed. Carmela asked me many times about what she looked like. Did she have hair? I said she was wearing a cute little hat. Um, and we held her and we talked to her, and so I have a memory of what she looked like in my head. And but I don't believe she is that body at all,
Mm-hmm.
because that body wasn't meant for this earth.
Mm-hmm.
But so much happened since she passed away with our family, which I will say eventually I'm going to tell. There's a whole other piece to the story, because I've not everyone gets to find out what really happened and why they had miscarriages. A lot of times we don't know or don't want to know,
Mm-hmm.
or are unable to know. I mean, and
Yep.
that's more normal. I went on a crazy investigation and found so many things that I'm actually working on a protocol to change women's health and move women's health forward so this doesn't happen to other people. But I'm not really allowed to talk about it yet, so we'll have to do another podcast when that all happens.
I'd love
I've
that.
been I've been channeling my grief. I also have to say that's been such a help for me. I've been able to honestly make something beautiful out of something so awful, because
Mm-hmm.
nothing will ever make it okay what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing will make it give it a purpose, like, or everything happens for a reason is really not helpful when you lose a child. So I don't think it's a reason, but I am creating, I think, some giving purpose to something
Mm-hmm.
that's really, really tragic. And that's been super helpful this year with my healing and what I can focus on. And so when I think of Rosie, to answer your question, I think about all the babies we're going to save. And
Mm-hmm.
I think about her in our family and her in my heart. And I think about, I didn't even think about when I was naming her Rosie that I was going to see roses all day long. Like, that's such a beautiful symbol. And like, I named her Rosie because I wanted to, and I'm so glad that's her name, because we literally see roses all day, or we hear the word rose or Rosie, and I feel warm and fuzzy when I think of her, I'm still incredibly heartbroken and sad, and that will never, I think, change ever. But I also describe grief as a house. So when Rosie first died, I was in this room, and then as the months and weeks went on, I moved from room to room, and I would have more room for joy, or I would have more room for acceptance, and I would the pain never changed. It's just that I opened up more and I let more um, joy and love in. And
Mm.
so it's been interesting, this journey, from last year to right now, how I look. I'm telling you, it's like I spent every single day doing something for this recovery. Now, I also had the ability to have, I wasn't working. I focused
Mhm.
solely on healing. I had to heal physically. I was pregnant 2 times in 1 year. I had a lot of physical healing to do, a lot of acupuncture. I did a detox. I did like a sauna. I did body scrubbing. I did all these vitamins. I did vitamin IVs. I mean, I did like physical, very LA. I moved to LA just to get in on the healing here
Gotta
because
get the
it's
good
so
stuff.
much.
There is.
Oh yeah. And so I went to all the crunchy doctors and naturopaths and,
Yep.
everything I could possibly do. I did this year, but not just physically because it's been a whole body experience. So I've been
Mhm.
healing physically, but emotionally with trauma work, with, like I said, with therapy, it's been my lifeline.
Mhm.
Also medicine. I started Prozac. Now I have been sober for 10 years in March upcoming. And I never took medicine before, and that could be a whole other podcast, but I truly never allowed myself to do that because of judgment. And then I finally needed a
Really?
life raft. Yeah, well, I will say that people who are sober, as amazing as it is, there are a lot of judgments about, I don't know,
Hmm.
forms of sobriety. And so I could not believe in or be a advocate more now for an SSRI if it's needed. You don't even like it's not it's so personal. Obviously, it depends on everyone's chemistry, but
Mhm.
I was trying everything that I've ever tried before for my mental health, and it was just not quite enough. And then
Mhm.
once I took Prozac, I was able to be the most me I've been in a long
I love
time to get through it. So I
Thank
have
you for
to,
sharing that.
of course. Oh my gosh, I absolutely love it. And what now, the timeline of it, I'd like to maybe figure out a different way to deal with serotonin and all that stuff. But
Mhm.
I just, I'll say one more thing. I gave myself just permission. And again, I think this was because I was 35 and the women who came before me and all the women who wrote to me and everyone who told me to be kind, be patient, because I was also carrying baby weight for almost the whole year. Like just looking at yourself in the mirror and seeing baby weight and not having the baby is heartbreaking in itself every day. Every single day you are not uh, you know, kind of relieved of that pain when you look pregnant. And so I had to be kinder to myself than I have ever been in my whole life. And again, you know, just a teeny silver lining of going through something so hard is I have turned inward and healed so much inside, from this experience. And again, I
Mhm.
wouldn't wish it upon anyone ever, but I do think taking a traumatic experience and doing the work, is. I feel like I am representative of what that could be now. Like in the
Mm.
middle of it, like I'm still in the middle of it. It's
Mhm.
only been a year, but I just mean for how far I've come in a year where I'm able to sit and talk about this, I'm able to put out this music for her. I'm going to sing on TV a song that I wrote for her, and I might cry. I have room for it all. But I just like I couldn't possibly be this version of me without the work that I did, and I wanted to heal the best I could for Carmela because I am a mom. I'm a mom first, always. And whether it's for Carmela who's here or Rosie who's not here, it doesn't matter. Carmel's learning from me. And so she learned how to swim this summer. She learned how to ride a bike this summer. Like this girl is thriving. And that is what makes me feel the best. Obviously I have my good days and bad days, but to see Carmela doing well and she's in preschool and she loves it, it means that we're doing okay.
Mhm.
Like it happened, we're still going through it, but we are okay because she
Mhm.
is okay. So I think she really represents what our family dynamic is right now.
Mhm.
And our families showed up for us more, and I will say, just a side note, the best thing you could possibly do for someone who loses anyone is bring them food. We had a house full of flowers, and as I am don't want to sound ungrateful. They were beautiful, and everything was so heartfelt, and all the outreach was unbelievable. But like when a friend of ours came over and brought like baked ziti, we were just like, we were thrilled. Food was the best. So that's like, you know, just a helpful note that like
For
talking
sure.
about the person that passed away, bringing your friends, family, whoever it is, bringing them food, not asking them what they need because they can't tell you, but and that you probably can't give them what they need, but giving them what you can give them is enough. And just saying, I'm here, this is awful. What can I do? Or
Hmm.
let me just sit with you. Let me help
Hmm.
you. Let me come do your laundry. Let me, like whatever it is, like the people that came to experience it with us were the most helpful,
Hmm.
because you do feel very alone, and people go back to their life, whether it's, honestly, I feel this way about grief with anyone who passes away, where the flowers die, everyone goes back to work and you have to move on. And it's you know it's an awful experience for everyone, but we all go through it. That's why
Hmm.
it's interesting to me that we're so lacking in this department, where it's a thing we actually all share,
Hmm.
grief, so to I've learned how to process it. I've made room for it. I share, with my friends, what I think, and this is just my experience, but I'm like, I've been forced into learning this, but I'm happy to um, show where I am now from what I've done, And again, I don't take all the credit. I've done so much. Everyone's helped me so much. So many things have helped me so much. I just show up. I just show up for the acupuncture. I stopped eating gluten. Like I just do the thing that someone suggests I do, and slowly I am healing from the inside out.
So, can you talk a little bit about the role that music has played in your healing, and particularly with your new album coming out?
Sure. So, I sing to Carmela every day of her life. I sang to her when she was in my belly. I sang to Rosie when she was in my belly. I expressed myself the most through song. And so when I made a lullaby record for Carmela, I remember just honestly recording the songs I was actually singing to her. It wasn't like, some thought out promotional thing. It really was just, these are the songs I sing to her. And Paul sang on songs for Carmela, and it was just this cute family thing. And the outreach from moms is just like so amazing that they listen to
Mm.
this lullaby record every day. So I knew I would do another one if I had another baby. And so when I was pregnant with Rosie, I came up with this track list, and these were, just songs that I was singing to her, to Carmela, and songs that me and Carmela were singing to my belly. I mean, these songs really are emotionally important in the story for us. And so when Rosie passed away, I knew that I was going to have to go through my own version of healing, and music would be a huge part of that, because that's how I heal. That's how I experience the world. And so um, I was really grateful when I decided to do, and when my label said, it was cool that we do this whole lullaby record for Rosie, because I knew that it was going to take on a whole new life
Hmm.
because she had passed away. But I also knew it's so important to honor her. So this really is that piece of the puzzle where when someone passes away and we want to keep talking about them, and me and Paul are the only people that met Rosie, so we're the only ones with a memory of her. But now this album will exist forever, and she will exist forever, and that experience, and it just makes this part of our life in such a way. Like I said, for me, it's so healing. But I'm glad to share these songs with these intentions for everyone and all the moms, and
Hmm.
for moms who have children and who have lost children, or just want to play these songs for their children, like whatever version of it. I'm also trying to make the space for loss, and not have it be too sad, because these songs are so beautiful and childlike. Um, but I'm really proud of it. I think it really came out. The feeling really comes across that, we're very emotional. And Carmela is singing her first duet with me. So I'm very excited about that, for everyone to hear Carmela's singing voice, because I don't mean to be a stage mom, but it is so cute.
Wow.
So there is joy on this album too. And we're honoring Rosie with it.
Hmm. At Motherly, we believe that motherhood brings out our superpowers. And those are, I think, things inside of us that are otherworldly. And for me, have often been things that I didn't know were in there until motherhood. So I'm curious, Christina, what is your superpower?
Wow, my superpower. Huh. Let's see. I think my superpower is uh well, I kind of touched upon it before. I think it's knowing what our children need by listening inside. So no book, no blog, no, advice really does the trick better than a mom and their child and what they need. And like, I just feel like I was so nervous about becoming a mom, and then I became so uh, confident when I became one by listening to that voice. It slowly made me so, I'm still anxious about all different things, but when it's about Carmela, I got this. I know what my baby girl needs. I listen to myself. That feels like a superpower to me. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, like when she needs me, I like, rip off and I'm wearing a cape and it's super mom and, like, because I love my husband, but a lot of times the partner is just guessing. We're like, no, we know. We know, we can feel it. If we listen, we can feel it.
Mm, so beautiful. Christina Perri, thank you so much for joining us today on the Motherly
Thank
Podcast.
you. Thanks.